The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble corridors of Windsor Castle as Thomas Mitchell adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be another routine day. At 42 years old, Thomas had served as a palace guard for nearly 2 decades, earning respect through his unwavering dedication and quiet professionalism. His weathered hand smoothed the red fabric of his tunic while his mind wandered to the afternoon's scheduled activities in the children's wing. The children's wing of the palace had become Thomas's special assignment 3 years prior, following a recommendation from the head of security who had noticed his natural ability to connect with the young royals. Unlike the formal, rigid atmosphere that dominated most of the castle, this section buzzed with the innocent energy of childhood. Prince William, now 8 years old, and his younger brother Harry, aged 4, had grown particularly fond of Thomas. They would often run to greet him during his rounds, sharing stories about their lessons or asking about his family. Thomas remembered the first time he had been assigned to the children's area. He had expected it to be a simple posting, perhaps even boring, compared to the high-stakes security work elsewhere in the palace. However, he quickly discovered that protecting children required a different kind of vigilance. It wasn't just about watching for external threats. It was about creating an environment where young minds could develop without fear, where laughter could echo through ancient halls, and where the weight of royal duty didn't crush the spirit of childhood. The children had their own schedules, carefully planned by their tutors and nannies. Morning lessons began at 9 o'clock sharp, covering everything from mathematics and literature to French and piano. Thomas had learned their routines by heart, knowing exactly when they would emerge for their mid-morning break, when they would have lunch, and when they would retire for their afternoon rest. This predictability allowed him to anticipate their needs and ensure their safety without being intrusive. On this particular morning, however, something felt different. The usual bustle of palace staff seemed more hurried, and hushed conversation stopped abruptly when he passed. Thomas had developed a sixth sense for tension during his years of service, and the subtle changes in behavior around him triggered his professional instincts. The head butler, normally composed and methodical in his movements, appeared agitated as he spoke quietly with other senior staff members near the main staircase. As Thomas made his way toward the children's wing, he encountered Mrs. Sarah Henderson, the head nanny who had been caring for the royal children since Prince William's birth. Her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of stress. A few strands of grey hair had escaped from her neat bun, and her typically steady hands trembled slightly as she carried a tea tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," Thomas greeted her with his customary politeness, noting the concern etched across her features. "Oh, Thomas, thank goodness you're here early today," she replied, her voice carrying an unusual edge of worry. "There's been some commotion this morning. The king received an urgent message during breakfast, and since then the entire palace has been in an uproar. I'm trying to keep the children's routine as normal as possible, but with all the rushing about..." Thomas nodded understandingly. He had witnessed similar situations before, where external pressures would ripple through the palace like stones thrown into a calm pond. His primary concern was always the children's well-being, ensuring that adult worries didn't unnecessarily disturb their peaceful world. "Are the boys aware of anything unusual?" he asked, referring to the young princes. "William seems to sense that something is different, but Harry is too young to notice much beyond his immediate surroundings," Mrs. Henderson explained. "I've kept them busy with their morning lessons, but William keeps asking why everyone seems so serious today." Thomas appreciated Mrs. Henderson's efforts to maintain normalcy. In his experience, children were remarkably perceptive, often picking up on adult emotions even when adults believed they were successfully hiding their concerns. The key was to acknowledge their awareness without burdening them with inappropriate details. As they reached the children's wing, Thomas could hear the familiar sounds of young voices engaged in learning. Prince William's clear pronunciation echoed from the study room as he practiced his French vocabulary, while Prince Harry's giggles suggested he was more interested in playing than studying. These normal sounds provided comfort to Thomas, indicating that despite whatever crisis was unfolding elsewhere in the palace, the children remained in their protected bubble of innocence. The children's wing had been specially designed with their safety and comfort in mind. Heavy oak doors marked the entrance, and beyond them lay a series of interconnected rooms that served various purposes: a classroom, a playroom, a small library, and sleeping quarters. The windows were positioned high enough to provide natural light while maintaining security, and the furniture was appropriately sized for small occupants. Colourful tapestries depicting fairy tales and adventure stories adorned the walls, creating an atmosphere that was both royal and child-friendly. Thomas stationed himself at the entrance to the children's wing, where he could monitor both the internal activities and any approaching visitors. From this position, he could see Mrs. Henderson guiding the boys through their morning routine while keeping an eye on the main corridor for any unusual activity. His training had taught him to be constantly aware of his surroundings, noting every person who passed, every sound that seemed out of place, and every change in the normal rhythm of palace life. Around mid-morning, the first signs of real trouble began to manifest. Thomas noticed an increase in the number of senior staff members hurrying past the children's wing, their faces grave and their conversations conducted in urgent whispers. The palace's chief secretary, a man known for his calm demeanor and measured pace, practically ran past Thomas without his usual polite acknowledgement. This behavior was so out of character that Thomas felt his protective instincts sharpen further. Shortly after, Thomas overheard fragments of conversation from passing staff members that made his blood run cold. Words like crisis, emergency meeting, and immediate action filtered through the air, painting a picture of a situation far more serious than he had initially realized. While he couldn't piece together the complete picture from these scattered phrases, it was clear that whatever was happening required urgent attention from the highest levels of palace administration. The children, blissfully unaware of the growing tension, continued their morning activities. Prince William had moved on to his arithmetic lesson, carefully working through addition problems under Mrs. Henderson's patient guidance. Prince Harry had been given colored pencils and paper and was creating what he proudly announced was a picture of his favorite horse from the royal stables. Their innocent focus on these simple tasks provided a stark contrast to the adult world of crisis management unfolding just beyond their protected space. Thomas made a mental note to speak with the head of security about the situation when the opportunity arose, but for now, his priority remained clear: maintain the safety and tranquility of the children's environment, regardless of what chaos might be erupting elsewhere. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, and that oath extended especially to the most vulnerable members, the children who depended on the adults around them to shield them from the harsh realities of the world. As the morning progressed, Thomas began to formulate contingency plans in his mind. If the situation required it, he knew exactly how to secure the children's wing, how to communicate with other security personnel, and how to evacuate the children safely if necessary. These preparations were part of his professional training, but he hoped they would remain theoretical exercises rather than practical necessities. The sound of approaching footsteps, heavier and more numerous than usual, caught Thomas's attention around 11 o'clock. Through the corridor came a group of men he recognized as senior advisors and government officials, their formal dress and serious expressions indicating the gravity of whatever matter had brought them to the palace. Among them he spotted Lord Chancellor Bradford, a man whose presence almost always signaled matters of national importance. Thomas straightened his posture and prepared for what he sensed would be a challenging day. Whatever crisis had descended upon the palace, he was determined that it would not reach the children under his protection. The laughter still emanating from the study room behind him served as a reminder of what he was duty-bound to preserve: the innocence and safety of childhood in a world where such precious things were often the first casualties of adult conflicts. The tension in the palace reached a breaking point just after the clock struck noon. Thomas had been observing the increasing activity in the corridors when he heard the unmistakable sound of raised voices echoing from the direction of the main conference room. The voices carried an urgency and anger that he had rarely heard within these walls, where diplomatic language and measured tones usually prevailed even during the most serious discussions. Through his earpiece, Thomas received a brief message from the head of security: all units maintain current positions. Situation developing in main conference room. Children's wing security is priority level 1. The coded language told Thomas everything he needed to know. Whatever was happening had escalated to the point where the safety protocols for the royal children had been activated. Mrs. Henderson appeared at Thomas's shoulder, having noticed his increased alertness. "The boys have finished their lessons early today," she whispered. "I thought perhaps they could have their lunch and then rest quietly this afternoon. William keeps asking about the noise, and I'm running out of ways to distract him." Thomas nodded approvingly. Mrs. Henderson's instincts were sound, keeping the children occupied with familiar routines while gradually reducing stimulation would help them remain calm if the situation continued to deteriorate. He made a mental note to ensure that their afternoon rest period was strictly enforced, creating a buffer of time during which any necessary security measures could be implemented without disturbing the children. The sound of multiple sets of formal shoes clicking rapidly against the marble floors grew louder, as what appeared to be a small army of government officials, advisors, and palace staff converged on the main conference room. Thomas could see them through the ornate archway at the end of the corridor: men in dark suits with briefcases, women in professional attire carrying thick folders, and several individuals he recognized as members of Parliament. The gravity of their expressions and the speed of their movements suggested that whatever crisis had brought them together was escalating rapidly. Prince William appeared in the doorway behind Thomas, his young face showing the curiosity and slight concern that bright children display when they sense adult worry. "Mr. Thomas," he said in his clear, well-modulated voice, "why is everyone walking so quickly today, and why do they all look so serious?" Thomas knelt down to the boy's eye level, a technique he had learned for communicating with children during potentially stressful situations. "Sometimes grown-ups have very important meetings about serious matters," he explained gently. "When they're thinking hard about important things, they might look serious, but that doesn't mean anything is wrong with you or your brother." "Is Papa in one of those meetings?" William asked, referring to his father with the innocent directness that children possess. "I believe your father is discussing some important matters with other adults," Thomas replied carefully, maintaining honesty while avoiding unnecessary details. "But right now, the most important thing is for you to have a nice lunch with Harry and Mrs. Henderson, and then perhaps a quiet afternoon with your books or games." William seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Thomas could see the intelligent wheels turning in the young prince's mind. At 8 years old, William was beginning to understand that his family's life was different from others, though he didn't yet grasp the full implications of royal responsibility and the pressures that came with it. Around 1 o'clock, the situation took a dramatic turn. Thomas heard his name being called from down the corridor and turned to see James Morrison, the deputy head of security, approaching at a brisk pace. James's face was flushed, and his usually impeccable uniform showed signs of the stress that was clearly affecting the entire security team. "Thomas, I need to brief you on the situation," James said in a low voice as he reached the entrance to the children's wing. "There's been a significant development in Northern Ireland. Intelligence suggests a potential threat to the royal family, and the King is meeting with the Prime Minister and security chiefs to discuss the response. The meeting has become quite heated, with disagreements about the appropriate level of security measures." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. Threats to the royal family were always taken seriously, but situations involving Northern Ireland carried particular weight, given the complex political and security challenges in that region. He knew that such threats often required difficult decisions about public appearances, travel plans, and security protocols that could significantly impact the family's daily life. "What's the current threat assessment for the children?" Thomas asked, his professional training taking over.
"Level orange," James replied, using the code that indicated heightened alertness without immediate evacuation procedures.
"We're implementing enhanced security measures throughout the palace, but the king is insisting that the children's routines remain as normal as possible."
However, there's significant disagreement among the advisors about whether the children should be moved to a more secure location. This information explained the heated voices Thomas had been hearing from the conference room. The balance between maintaining normal family life and ensuring absolute security was a constant challenge in royal protection, and disagreements about the appropriate response were not uncommon during crisis situations. "The king wants to see the children," James continued, and Thomas noticed a slight hesitation in his voice. "He's asked that they be brought to the private sitting room adjacent to the conference room, so he can reassure himself of their safety, and perhaps spend a few minutes with them before the meetings resume." The private sitting room was located directly next to the main conference room, where the heated discussions were taking place. Bringing the children into that environment, even briefly, would expose them to the very tensions and adult anxieties that he had been working all day to shield them from. "With respect," Thomas said carefully, "I don't believe that's advisable given the current atmosphere. The children have been calm and content in their wing. Moving them closer to the conference area would likely upset them and potentially interfere with the king's ability to focus on the security discussions." James nodded, clearly having anticipated this response. "I understand your concerns, Thomas, and I share them. But the request came directly from the king, and you know that royal direct orders are not typically questioned." Thomas found himself in an impossible position. His duty was to obey royal commands, but his professional judgment and his protective instincts toward the children were telling him that this particular command would not serve anyone's best interests. He had seen what happened when children were exposed to adult stress during crisis situations. They became anxious, had difficulty sleeping, and often developed fears that could last for months or even years. "Has anyone explained to the king the current state of the children?" Thomas asked. "They're calm, they've had their lunch, and they're preparing for their afternoon rest. They're completely unaware of the crisis, and their normal routine is providing them with security and comfort." "The king is under enormous pressure," James replied. "The threat assessment suggests that the family may need to alter their public schedule significantly, possibly for several months. He wants to see his children, to hold them and reassure himself that they're safe. From a father's perspective, it's completely understandable. Thomas understood the king's emotional needs, but he also understood child psychology and the importance of maintaining protective boundaries during stressful periods. Children needed adults to be strong and calm, to maintain their routines, and to shield them from anxieties they were too young to process or understand. "What if we compromise?" Thomas suggested. "What if the king comes here to the children's wing instead? It would be much calmer, and he could see them in their familiar environment without exposing them to the tension in the conference area." The security team doesn't want him moving around the palace unnecessarily right now. The conference room area has been secured, and they prefer to keep him in that vicinity. Henderson approached them, having settled the children for their afternoon rest. "Gentlemen, is everything all right?" The boys are asking more questions, and I can hear some rather loud voices coming from the main part of the palace. Thomas made a decision that would prove to be the most important of his career. "Mrs. Henderson, please ensure that the children remain in their wing for the rest of the afternoon. Keep them occupied with quiet activities, and if they ask about the noise, tell them that the grown-ups are having important discussions that require loud voices sometimes." He turned to James. "I need you to convey a message to the king. Tell him that Guard Mitchell respectfully requests that the children remain in their protected environment for the duration of the crisis. Tell him that they are safe, happy, and completely unaware of the situation, and that moving them at this time would serve no security purpose while potentially causing them unnecessary distress." James stared at Thomas in amazement. "Thomas, you're asking me to tell the king that you're refusing his direct order?" "I'm asking you to tell the king that I'm prioritizing the security and well-being of his children over his understandable desire to see them during a stressful time," Thomas corrected. "My oath is to protect the royal family, and sometimes protection means protecting them from situations that seem harmless but could cause psychological harm." The weight of this decision settled over Thomas like a heavy cloak. He was essentially refusing a direct royal command, something that could result in immediate dismissal and possibly criminal charges depending on how the situation was interpreted. However, his 20 years of experience and his deep understanding of child welfare told him that this was the right choice, regardless of the personal consequences. As James departed to deliver this unprecedented message, Thomas returned to his post at the entrance to the children's wing, where the sound of Prince Harry's laughter drifted out from the playroom. Whatever happened next, he was determined that this innocent joy would not be disrupted by the adult world of political crisis and security threats. The 20 minutes that followed James's departure felt like hours to Thomas, as he maintained his position at the entrance to the children's wing. He could hear the muffled sounds of the ongoing crisis management from the conference room, punctuated occasionally by what sounded like heated exchanges between various officials. Through it all, the peaceful sounds of children at play continued behind him, creating a surreal contrast that reinforced his conviction that he had made the right decision. Prince William had apparently grown tired of his afternoon rest and had convinced Mrs. Henderson to allow him to work on a puzzle in the main playroom. Thomas could hear the boy's methodical approach to problem-solving as he searched for pieces and occasionally asked Mrs. Henderson for help. Prince Harry, meanwhile, seemed content to play with his collection of toy soldiers, creating elaborate battles and adventures that required various sound effects and dramatic narrations. At exactly 2:30, Thomas heard the unmistakable sound of the king's footsteps approaching down the corridor. Even without looking, Thomas could identify the particular rhythm and weight of the royal stride, developed through years of formal training and ceremonial duties. The footsteps were accompanied by those of several other individuals, suggesting that the king was not coming alone. Thomas straightened to attention as the small group rounded the corner. The king approached with a face that showed the strain of the morning's events, his usually composed features reflecting the burden of making difficult decisions under pressure. Behind him came James Morrison, the deputy head of security, along with Lord Chancellor Bradford and two other senior advisors whom Thomas recognized but could not name. "Guard Mitchell," the king said, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of royal tradition, but also a note of frustration that Thomas had never heard before. "I understand that you have concerns about my request to see my children." Thomas executed a perfect formal salute before responding. "Your Majesty, my concerns are entirely focused on the well-being and security of the young princes. In my professional judgment, maintaining their current calm environment serves their best interests, and by extension, serves your interests as well." The king studied Thomas's face for a long moment, and Thomas could see the internal struggle between royal authority and paternal instinct playing out in the monarch's eyes. "Guard Mitchell, these are my children. Surely a father has the right to see his own sons, particularly during a time of potential danger." "Absolutely, Your Majesty," Thomas replied respectfully. "However, the children are currently unaware that there is any potential danger. They have spent the day in their normal routine, they are happy and secure, and they are displaying no signs of stress or anxiety. Introducing them to the current environment, even briefly, would likely change that positive state." Lord Chancellor Bradford stepped forward, clearly irritated by what he perceived as insubordination. "Guard Mitchell, His Majesty has given you a direct order. The King's wishes are not subject to the opinions of palace staff, regardless of their experience or good intentions." Thomas felt the weight of protocol and hierarchy pressing down on him. But he also felt the strength of his professional conviction and his genuine care for the children's welfare. "My lord, I have taken an oath to protect the royal family. Sometimes that protection requires making difficult decisions about what serves their long-term interests versus their immediate desires." The king raised his hand to silence Bradford before he could respond. "What exactly are you protecting my children from, Guard Mitchell?" Thomas chose his words carefully, knowing that his entire career and possibly his freedom hung in the balance.
"Your Majesty, I am protecting them from unnecessary exposure to adult anxiety during a crisis situation. Children, particularly young children, are remarkably sensitive to emotional environments. Even if they don't understand the specific details of a crisis, they absorb the tension, worry, and fear that adults carry. This can lead to sleep disturbances, behavioral changes, and lingering anxiety that can persist long after the original crisis has passed." The sound of Prince William's voice calling out, "Mrs. Henderson, I found the corner piece," drifted through the entrance to the children's wing, providing a perfect example of the innocent normalcy that Thomas was trying to preserve. "You can hear them, Your Majesty," Thomas continued. "They are engaged in normal childhood activities. They feel safe and secure in their familiar environment. Bringing them into proximity with the current crisis, even briefly, would introduce them to a level of adult stress that they are not equipped to process." James Morrison spoke up, clearly uncomfortable with the situation he found himself mediating. "Your Majesty, from a security standpoint, Guard Mitchell's position has merit. The children's current location is more easily secured and monitored than the conference room area, and their calm state means they are not requiring additional attention or resources that might be needed elsewhere." The king began to pace in the small area in front of the children's wing entrance, his internal struggle becoming more visible. Thomas could see that the monarch understood the logic of his argument, but was fighting against every paternal instinct that demanded he hold his children close during a time of potential threat. "I need to see them," the king said finally, his voice softer and more vulnerable than Thomas had ever heard it. "I need to know that they are truly safe, that they are not frightened or confused by what's happening around them." Thomas made a decision that surprised even himself.
"Your Majesty, what if you could see them without them seeing you?"
The children's wing has an observation alcove that was designed for security purposes. You could watch them at play without disrupting their activities or introducing any stress into their environment. The suggestion seemed to catch everyone off guard, including Thomas himself. He had remembered the small alcove that had been built into the children's wing during its renovation 3 years earlier, designed to allow security personnel to observe the children without being intrusive. It had rarely been used, but it would provide exactly what the king needed: visual confirmation of his children's safety and well-being, without compromising their emotional security. Lord Chancellor Bradford looked skeptical. Is such an arrangement dignified for His Majesty? The king, however, seemed to consider the option seriously. "Where is this observation point?" Thomas led the group down a short side corridor to a small alcove fitted with one-way glass that looked into the main playroom of the children's wing. From this vantage point, they could see both Prince William working intently on his puzzle and Prince Harry engaged in an elaborate game with his toy soldiers, complete with sound effects and detailed storylines that only a 4-year-old imagination could devise. The transformation in the king's demeanor was immediately apparent. The tension in his shoulders relaxed as he watched his sons engaged in normal childhood activities, their faces showing no signs of distress or awareness of the crisis surrounding them. Prince William's focused concentration on his puzzle demonstrated the kind of calm problem-solving that suggested a secure and confident child, while Prince Harry's imaginative play indicated a healthy emotional state. "They seem completely unaware of the situation," the king murmured, more to himself than to the others present. "That is exactly right, Your Majesty," Thomas confirmed quietly. "Mrs. Henderson has maintained their normal routine throughout the day."
They had their lessons this morning, their regular lunch, and are now engaged in their typical afternoon activities. From their perspective, this has been a completely normal day.
The king watched for several more minutes as Prince William successfully placed several puzzle pieces and Prince Harry launched into what appeared to be an elaborate rescue mission involving his toy soldiers. The genuine joy and security radiating from both children was unmistakable, providing the reassurance that the king had desperately needed. "How long can this normalcy be maintained?" the king asked, his question directed as much to himself as to the others present. Thomas had been thinking about this very question throughout the day. "In my experience, Your Majesty, children can be shielded from crisis situations for surprisingly long periods if the adults around them remain calm and maintain consistent routines. The key is ensuring that the children's immediate environment remains stable and predictable, even when the larger world around them is in turmoil. And if the security situation requires more dramatic measures," Lord Chancellor Bradford asked, "then we implement those measures in ways that minimize the emotional impact on the children," Thomas replied. "If relocation becomes necessary, we frame it as an adventure or a special trip. If schedules need to change, we involve the children in planning their new routines. The goal is always to maintain their sense of security and control over their immediate environment." The king continued to watch his children for several more minutes, and Thomas could see the internal battle between his roles as monarch and father gradually resolving itself. The visual evidence of his children's contentment and security was providing the peace of mind that no amount of verbal assurance could have delivered. "Guard Mitchell," the king said finally, turning away from the observation window. "I want you to continue your current protocols. Maintain the children's routines, keep them in their secure environment, and ensure that they remain unaware of the current situation for as long as possible." "Yes, Your Majesty," Thomas replied, feeling a profound sense of relief mixed with professional validation. "However," the king continued, "I want regular updates on their status, and I want immediate notification if their emotional state changes in any way. If they begin to show signs of stress or anxiety, I want to know about it immediately." "Of course, Your Majesty." As the group prepared to return to the conference room, the king paused at the entrance to the children's wing. The sound of both boys laughing at something Prince Harry had said provided a perfect punctuation to the moment, reminding everyone present of what they were ultimately working to protect. The remainder of the afternoon passed with a strange mixture of tension and normalcy that Thomas found both exhausting and surreal. While the crisis management continued in the main conference room, the children's wing maintained its bubble of peaceful routine. Thomas had positioned himself to monitor both environments, keeping one ear tuned to the activities behind him and one eye on the corridor that connected the children's world to the adult realm of political and security concerns. Around 4 o'clock, Mrs. Bard Henderson emerged from the playroom with a concerned expression that immediately caught Thomas's attention. She approached him quietly, glancing back toward the children to ensure they couldn't overhear the conversation. "Thomas, Prince William has been asking increasingly specific questions about the activity in the palace today," she reported in a low voice. "He's noticed that his normal tea-time visitors haven't appeared, and he's wondering why his father hasn't come to say good afternoon as he usually does. I've been deflecting as best I can, but he's a bright child, and I can see him starting to piece together that something unusual is happening." This was exactly the kind of development that Thomas had been monitoring for throughout the day. Children, particularly intelligent ones like Prince William, could only be shielded from adult concerns for so long before their natural curiosity and perceptiveness began to break through the protective barriers that adults constructed around them. "What kind of questions is he asking specifically?" Thomas inquired. "He wants to know why everyone has been walking so quickly past the children's wing without stopping to say hello. He's noticed that the usual staff members who normally interact with him haven't appeared today. And he's asked twice why his father seems to be having such long meetings," Mrs. Henderson explained. Thomas considered the situation carefully. The fact that Prince William was beginning to notice changes in the normal palace routine meant that their window for maintaining complete innocence was starting to close. However, his questions seemed to reflect curiosity rather than anxiety, which suggested that he was still feeling secure within his immediate environment. "How has he been behaving otherwise? Is he showing any signs of stress or upset?" Thomas asked. "No, not at all. He completed his puzzle, helped his brother with a difficult passage in his storybook, and has been perfectly well behaved and content. His questions seem more like the natural curiosity of an observant child rather than worry or fear." This assessment aligned with Thomas's own observations. From his position at the entrance to the children's wing, he had heard Prince William's interactions with both his brother and Mrs. Mell. Henderson throughout the afternoon, and the tone and content of their conversations had remained normal and cheerful. At that moment, Prince William himself appeared in the doorway, his young face showing the kind of polite determination that suggested he had something important to discuss with the adults.
"Mr. Thomas," he said with the formal courtesy that had been instilled in him from an early age, "may I ask you a question about today?" Thomas knelt down to the boy's eye level, maintaining the respectful but warm relationship they had developed over the years.
"Of course, Your Highness. What would you like to know?" "Is Papa having an important meeting about something serious?" Prince William asked directly, his clear blue eyes reflecting both intelligence and concern. Thomas recognized this as a critical moment. The boy's question was specific and perceptive, indicating that he had indeed observed enough to understand that something significant was happening. How Thomas responded would either successfully maintain the protective environment or begin the process of introducing the child to the adult world of crisis and concern. "Your father does have important meetings as part of his responsibilities as king," Thomas replied carefully. "Today's meetings are lasting longer than usual, which is why the palace routine seems a bit different." "Is the meeting about something that might affect Harry and me?" Prince William pressed, showing the kind of direct thinking that would serve him well in his future role, but complicated current efforts to shield him from adult worries. Thomas felt the weight of the moment. He could continue to deflect and redirect, but Prince William's questions suggested that he was already processing the available information and drawing his own conclusions. Sometimes, providing a carefully calibrated amount of truthful information was actually more reassuring than continued evasion. "The meeting is about keeping everyone in the royal family safe and secure," Thomas replied honestly. "Your father wants to make sure that you and Harry can continue to have normal days like today, with your lessons and games and time with Mrs. Charles Henderson, without any worries or concerns." Prince William considered this answer thoughtfully, showing the mature reflection that often surprised adults who interacted with him. "So Papa is working hard to make sure everything stays normal for us?" "That's exactly right," Thomas confirmed, pleased with the boy's interpretation of the situation. "Then I should probably not ask more questions about it, because asking questions might make it harder for Papa to concentrate on keeping things normal," Prince William concluded with the kind of logical reasoning that demonstrated both intelligence and consideration for others. Thomas felt a surge of admiration for the young prince's mature response. "That's very thoughtful of you, Your Highness. Your father would be proud of how considerate you're being." Prince William nodded seriously and then returned to the playroom, where Thomas could hear him explaining to Prince Harry that Papa was working very hard today and that they should play quietly so as not to disturb the important grown-up work happening in the palace. Henderson, who had observed this entire exchange, looked at Thomas with something approaching awe. "That was masterfully handled," she said quietly. "You gave him just enough information to satisfy his curiosity while actually reinforcing his sense of security rather than undermining it." Thomas felt proud of how the conversation had developed, but he also recognized that it represented a turning point. Prince William's awareness of the situation, even at the carefully managed level they had established, meant that the complete innocence of the morning could not be maintained indefinitely. Around 5 o'clock, James Morrison returned to the children's wing with an update on the developing situation. His expression was less tense than it had been earlier, suggesting that some progress was being made in the crisis management meetings. "Thomas, the security assessment has been revised slightly," he reported. "The intelligence about the Northern Ireland situation has been clarified, and while the threat remains real, it appears to be less imminent than initially believed. The King has asked me to thank you for your handling of the children today, and to inform you that he will be coming to the children's wing for a brief visit before their evening meal." This news represented a significant shift in the day's dynamics. If the King was comfortable enough with the security situation to visit the children's wing, it suggested that the immediate crisis had been either resolved or at least contained to the point where normal family interactions could resume. "What should we tell the children about his visit?" Thomas asked. "The King wants to keep it as normal as possible. He's planning to read them a bedtime story and spend some quiet time with them before they have their evening meal and prepare for bed. From their perspective, it should seem like a typical father's visit at the end of a busy day." Thomas appreciated the King's approach. By framing his visit in terms of normal family routine, rather than as a response to the day's crisis, the children would be able to enjoy time with their father without being introduced to adult anxieties that they were not equipped to handle. "I'll prepare Mrs. Henderson and make sure the children are ready for a pleasant evening visit," Thomas confirmed. As James departed, Thomas reflected on the day's events and the decisions he had made. His refusal to bring the children to the conference room area during the height of the crisis had been vindicated by subsequent events. The children had remained calm and secure throughout the day. The king had been able to focus on crisis management without worrying about his children's emotional state, and the family would now be able to reunite under positive circumstances rather than stressful ones. The sound of Prince Harry calling out, "William, come see what I built with my blocks." The innocent joy and sibling affection reflected in that simple invitation represented the kind of childhood experience that Thomas believed every child deserved, regardless of their position in society or the pressures facing their family. As evening approached, Thomas prepared for what he hoped would be a peaceful conclusion to one of the most challenging days of his career. The crisis was not over, but the children had been successfully shielded from its immediate impact, and family relationships had been preserved rather than strained by the pressure of external threats. The king's arrival at the children's wing just before 6 o'clock marked a dramatic shift in the day's atmosphere. Gone was the tense, crisis-driven energy that had dominated the palace since morning, replaced by the warm anticipation of a father reuniting with his children after a difficult day. Thomas watched as the monarch approached, noting that, while fatigue was evident in his bearing, the acute stress that had characterized his earlier appearance had been replaced by a calmer, more resolved demeanor. Prince William and Prince Harry heard their father's distinctive footsteps before they saw him, and their excited voices carried clearly from the playroom as they abandoned their current activities to greet him. Thomas stepped aside as the king entered the children's wing, witnessing a reunion that perfectly embodied the balance between royal dignity and paternal affection that characterized the monarchy's approach to family life. "Papa!" Prince Harry called out, rushing forward with the uninhibited joy that only a 4-year-old could display. He threw himself into his father's arms with complete confidence that he would be caught and held securely. Prince William approached with more reserved excitement, understanding even at his young age that there were appropriate ways to greet the king, even when that king happened to be his father. "Good evening, Papa," he said with a small bow before stepping forward for his own embrace. Thomas observed the king's response to his children with professional interest and personal warmth. The monarch's face transformed completely as he held his sons, the weight of kingship temporarily set aside in favor of the simpler, more fundamental role of father. The stress lines that had been etched around his eyes throughout the day softened, and for a moment, he looked like any father coming home to his children after a challenging day at work. "Have you both been good for Mrs. Henderson today?" the king asked, settling into one of the child-sized chairs that furnished the playroom, looking somewhat comical but completely comfortable in the miniature furniture. "We've been very good," Prince Harry announced proudly. "I built a castle with my blocks, and William helped me make it even bigger. And I finished my puzzle," Prince William added with quiet satisfaction. "It had 500 pieces, and I only needed help with 3 of them." The king listened to his children's reports of their day with the same attention that Thomas had seen him give to important state matters, asking questions about their activities and expressing genuine interest in their accomplishments. This focus on normal childhood experiences served to reinforce the sense of security and routine that Thomas and Mrs. Beth Henderson had worked to maintain throughout the day. Mrs. Trenner Henderson appeared with the children's evening meal, and Thomas watched as the family settled into their typical routine. The king helped Prince Harry cut his meat while discussing the day's lessons with Prince William, creating an atmosphere of domestic normalcy that seemed almost miraculous given the crisis that had been unfolding just corridors away. "Mr. Thomas," Prince William called out during a pause in the dinner conversation, "Papa says you did something very important today. What did you do?" Thomas felt himself flush slightly under the direct attention of all 3 members of the royal family. The king's expression showed amusement and gratitude, while the children looked at him with curiosity and expectation. "I just made sure that you and your brother could have a normal, peaceful day," Thomas replied simply. "Sometimes that's the most important job anyone can have." The king nodded approvingly at this response. "Mr. Thomas understood that the best way to take care of you was to make sure you felt safe and happy, even when the grown-ups were dealing with complicated matters. Like when Mrs. Ken and Dub Henderson makes sure we have our regular bedtime even when we want to stay up late?" Prince Harry asked, demonstrating the kind of connection-making ability that often surprised adults. "Exactly like that," the king confirmed. "Sometimes taking care of people means making decisions they might not understand at the moment, but that help them in the long run." After dinner, the king read both children a story from their favorite book of fairy tales, choosing one about a brave knight who protected a peaceful kingdom from external threats without the people of the kingdom ever knowing they had been in danger. Thomas recognized the parallel to the day's events and appreciated the king's subtle way of honoring the protective work that had been done, while maintaining the children's sense of security. As the children prepared for bed, the king took Thomas aside for a private conversation.
They stepped into the small corridor that connected the children's wing to the main palace, where they could speak freely without being overheard.
Guard Mitchell, I owe you an apology and an expression of gratitude,
The king began, his voice carrying a sincerity that Thomas had rarely heard from any royal family member.
This morning, when I demanded to see my children, I was reacting as a worried father rather than thinking as a responsible parent. You understood what my children needed better than I did in that moment.
Thomas felt deeply moved by this acknowledgement. Your Majesty, your desire to see your children during a crisis was completely natural and understandable.
My role was simply to provide a different perspective based on my experience with child welfare during stressful situations. You did far more than provide perspective, the king replied. You refused a direct royal command because you believed it was not in my children's best interests. That took extraordinary courage and demonstrated a level of commitment to my family's welfare that goes far beyond normal duty. The weight of what Thomas had done throughout the day settled over him fully for the first time. In the heat of the moment, he had been focused entirely on protecting the children from unnecessary stress. Only now did he fully appreciate the risk he had taken by essentially refusing the king's direct order. I hope you understand that my actions were motivated entirely by my commitment to the safety and well-being of the young princes, Thomas said carefully.
I understand that completely, the king assured him. In fact, I want to discuss your future role with the children.
The crisis today highlighted something that I had perhaps taken for granted, the need for someone in my children's protection detail who understands not just physical security but emotional security as well. Someone who can make difficult decisions about their welfare, even when those decisions conflict with immediate royal preferences.
Thomas felt a surge of professional pride mixed with some apprehension about what this might mean for his career. I would be honored to continue serving the royal family in whatever capacity would be most beneficial.
I'm promoting you to head of children's security, the king announced.
This position will give you authority to make decisions about the children's daily routines, their exposure to various situations, and their overall security environment. You'll report directly to me, but you'll have the autonomy to prioritize their well-being as you see fit. The magnitude of this offer took Thomas's breath away. Not only was he not being punished for his actions during the day, but he was being rewarded with increased responsibility and authority. More importantly, he was being entrusted with the ongoing welfare of children he had come to care for deeply. Your Majesty, I'm deeply honored by your confidence in me, Thomas replied. I promise you that I will continue to prioritize the children's emotional and physical security above all other considerations. I'm counting on exactly that, the king said with a smile. Today proved that sometimes the best way to serve the monarchy is to resist the monarchy's immediate impulses in favor of longer-term wisdom. As they returned to the children's wing, Thomas could hear Prince Harry's voice from his bedroom, apparently explaining to his stuffed animals all the important things that had happened during his day. Prince William was already settled in his bed, reading quietly by lamplight before sleep. The king spent a few more minutes with each child individually, hearing prayers, and providing the kind of personal attention that Thomas knew was precious to them. As the children settled into sleep, their father's presence providing the final reassurance that all was well in their small world. Later that evening, as Thomas completed his final rounds of the children's wing, he reflected on the extraordinary day and its implications for his future. He had learned that sometimes protecting people meant protecting them from their own impulses as much as from external threats. He had discovered that true loyalty sometimes required the courage to say no to those you served. And he had been reminded that the most important battles are often fought not with weapons or force, but with wisdom, patience, and an unwavering commitment to doing what is right rather than what is easy. The palace had returned to its normal evening quiet, the crisis meetings had concluded, and security measures had been adjusted to address the ongoing but manageable threat. Most importantly, two young princes slept peacefully in their beds, their dreams untroubled by the adult world of political complexity and security concerns. As Thomas settled into his new role and responsibilities, he carried with him the knowledge that he had successfully balanced the competing demands of royal protocol, parental concern, and child welfare. The day had tested his judgment, his courage, and his commitment to his principles, and he had emerged with a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to serve and protect the royal family. The sound of the palace settling into nighttime quiet provided a peaceful conclusion to a day that had begun with crisis but ended with renewed trust, expanded responsibility, and the satisfaction of knowing that when it mattered most, he had chosen correctly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve, but tonight, all was well in the realm he had been charged to protect.